Greetings everyone. Welcome to today's lecture on Muslim women education in colonial India, some reflections. In this lecture, I shall be talking about the long and short fiction by Muslim women writers of the 20th century to explore Muslim women's resistance to patriarchal structures of the state and the community. The lecture aims to deconstruct the dominant perception of women as frail, submissive, backward, or victimized. A rigorous analysis of works by several women writers helps us displace and delegitimize stereotypical identity of Muslim women produced in dominant discourses as well as popular culture. Before we delve further into the subject, let us discuss what was the nationalist response to the issue of female education. While on the one hand there were social reformers like Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, Jyotirao Phule, Pandita Ramabai and many more who supported female education and went against the traditional society to provide education to girls, there were national figures like Bal Gangadhar Tilak and Vishnu Shastri Chiplunkar, on the other hand, who voiced the opposition of the society to the cause of female education. So, for example, Tilak asserted time and again that education will be a hindrance for women in performing their duties as a housewife and a mother, and that soon English education will denationalize women. So, therefore, there was a section of society which, instead of spearheading the cause of female education, had started finding fault with the modern system of education and how it would have a derogatory impact on the personality of Indian women. They opposed the establishment of the first girls' high school in Pune in 1884 that had been started by M.G. Ranade, stating that the curriculum for girls should be different from that of boys. It should consist of knowledge about vernaculars, needlework, sanitation, cooking, etc., instead of subjects like mathematics, sciences, or English, as was being imparted to the boys. So, therefore, there was a clear-cut demarcation which was there in their minds as to what should consist of a girl's education and a boy's education. So, therefore, these thinkers stressed on giving moral and religious instruction through education, and all these including household skills should be taught by native women and not the missionary women. Tilak frequently cited the case of Rukma Bai, who had fought a court case against her husband to whom she was married in childhood, and this court case was fought by her because now her husband sought restitution of conjugal rights, whereas Rukma Bai was not interested in staying with her husband. The fact that Rukma Bai was educated and could articulate her thoughts and could also gain public support and finally even won the case became an instrument for Tilakites to elicit anger for English education of women from the conservative sections of Indian society. That Tilak was against English education for girls is evident from the following statement. Teaching women to read English would ruin their precious traditional virtues and would make them immoral and insubordinate, as was written in Maharata on 7th September 1884. So these lines clearly indicate that how it was considered a very important quality of women to remain subordinate to the larger society and also to be the upholders of traditional virtues and values. Now, the next important phase that one can talk about was the Home Rule movement and what was their standpoint on national education. During the Home Rule, Tilak proposed the scheme of national education, which consisted of moral and religious education, the theory of karma, existence of God, while completely discarding the English language, and also modern subjects as far as female education was concerned. For women, the scheme of education provided training of some technical skills and taught Dharam Shastras, since he believed that education for women should be religious as well as home-centered. Tilak repeatedly articulated through Maharatha that if given education, women will become independent and not abide by the rules of family and society at large. Education should train girls in a way that they ensure a happy family life after marriage, and not that they become rebels like Rukmabai and start demanding rights and even muster courage to approach court for getting themselves heard. Next in line, a thinker that we can talk about was D.K. Karve. And in 1896, D.K. Karve, who was a social reformer, established a shelter for widows that later expanded in 1907 to become a girls' high school in Pune. So the aim was to make unmarried girls as well as widows independent in their thoughts and finances. So the curriculum of the school was to ensure their employability as well as self-sufficiency. In 1915, Karve proposed for the establishment of a women's university in India at the annual session of the Social Conference at Bombay. He opened the university in 1916, which provided courses in modern sciences as well as English. In 1920, this university was shifted to Bombay and was renamed as SNDT, Indian Women's University. Similar curriculum was proposed to ensure intellectual development as well as employability of women. Now, this also was opposed by several nationalist leaders who demanded that the curriculum for women's higher education should deal rather with religious literature, customs, tradition, ways of living, so that the girls become efficient in their role of a homemaker. Now, since we have discussed the overall movement that was going on and various discrepancies that were there as far as female education was concerned and as well as the question of women was concerned, let us now deal with specifically the issue of Muslim women in the public domain. The entry of women, especially Muslim women, out of invisibility was undertaken at the turn of the 20th century in India by various socio-political and religious reformers. While it was believed that ignorance and illiteracy kept women out of the public sphere, patriarchal control was held responsible for not allowing women folk to step out of enforced seclusion. Women were secluded from the public space by the customs of parda, which further isolated them from social and cultural transformation than were their Muslim male counterparts. This made Muslim women substantially invisible to historical as well as social analysis as compared to other categories of Indian women. However, we see that right from the beginning, with little support from the male members, one could see defiance, and also there was an attempt by Muslim women themselves to question their deplorable situation. So women were capable of producing narratives which became synonymous with defiance. So voices of Muslim women concerning women-centric issues like marriage, domestic space, social, religious and political reforms, education, issues of whaling, sexual exploitation, and finally nationalism, all these became very important. Muslim women's mediations exhibit their negotiations with Muslim patriarchy within the Muslim society. On the other hand, they also open our eyes to the exclusions they were subjected to in the dominant discourses concerning women, both during the anti-colonial nationalist struggle as well as during the post-independence times, that is from 1947 onwards. In this context, I would like to mention some Muslim women who have not only written but also who have been talked about in contemporary literature. So, for example, Fatima Sheikh and her brother Usman Sheikh offered refuge to Savitri Bai and Jyoti Rao Phule when they were forced to leave their home in Pune for challenging the norm and educating Dalits and women. She also helped Savitri Bai in setting up their first girls' school called Indigenous Library in her own house. She challenged both the upper caste Hindu men and Orthodox Muslims by going all out against the stringent patriarchy that existed in Muslim families during those times. She enrolled in a teaching course with Savitri Bai Phule and taught Dalit, Shudra, Adivasi and female students until 1856. Her solidarity to the struggle of Jyoti Rao Phule and Savitri Bai Phule is quite remarkable, as it came at a time when their own families and community had alienated this couple. Unfortunately, very little information is available on the life and works of Fatima Sheikh. Then one can talk about a number of Muslim female writers. So, for example, Rokeya Sakhawat Hussain, Iqbalun Nisa Hussain, Rashid Jahan, Ismat Chugtai, Quratul N. Haider, Atiya Hussain, Zeenat Futehuli, then Siddiqa Begum Siwaharvi, Wajida Tabassum and Anis Jung. They made inroads into the male-dominant literary world to make interventions in the reform discourses by voicing their opinions. The most important fact that emerged was that their women characters were strong-willed, defiant and dissenting, putting up brave resistance against the normative perceptions of the wider Muslim community. If we talk about post-independence times, then one sees that there was some kind of weakening of Muslim female voices in the literary sphere, the reasons for which could be attributed to the 1947 partition and the subsequent ever-declining condition of Muslims in general in the field of education and employment, as was also reported by the Sachar Committee report. Now let us try to analyze what were the implications of the socio-religious reforms that we have time and again discussed with reference to Indian society during colonial period. So there is a need to analyze the category of Muslim women as it was not a homogeneous category. The relevance of social and religious reform movements undertaken for the reformation of Muslim women during the first part of the 20th century also needs to be traced, specifically taking into account different categories based on class distinctions as well as elite and mass women. And these reform movements were undertaken to deal with the issues related to veiling, seclusion, marriage laws, etc. in the Muslim community by several reformers like Mumtaz Ali, Altaf Hussain Ali, Maulvi Chirag Ali, Zakaullah, etc. So one observes that the male agency was equally strong, powerful and influential as far as the initiative for these reforms were concerned in the beginning. So women reformers such as Rokeya Sakhawat Hussain, Wahida Begum, Mohammadi Begum, the Begums of Bhopal took several positive steps towards the renewal of Muslim women's position not only within the Muslim society but in the Indian society at large. So talking about the issue of educational reform, the question of education was one of the prerequisites for bringing women out of forced seclusion and veiling. The writings of Rokeya Sakhawat Hussain, Atiya Hussain and so many other writers like Ismat Chugtai also indicate this. While social reform for women was undertaken to make them aware of their rights, educational reform was meant to establish Muslim women as independent beings who could improve the future of coming generations with the help of literacy and learning that they would acquire in due course of time. Several circumstances that encouraged the need for educational reform and also the spirit of nationalism indicated that there was a need for equal partnering and the same was being felt by men also. The reform towards Muslim women's education was jointly undertaken by male reformers as well as by the Britishers. Women themselves were not far behind when it came to regeneration and re-evaluation of their position in society. While a number of British reformers hinted at the absence of educated Muslim women, they urged the men of the community to work towards this problem. And a number of government reports highlighted the deplorable conditions of Muslim women in the educational area. So several educational establishments that were proposed because both the administration as well as the community leaders were aware of the constraints of parda among women, and hence special rooms were arranged as well as conveyance was arranged so that the custom of parda would not be a hindrance and Muslim women would come out of their homes in order to study. So therefore the issue of appropriate and inappropriate was always very important and a deciding factor also for Muslim women to venture out of their homes. The works of several reformers were denounced and also proscribed for Muslim women, fearing that such kind of literature would lead them astray, and a few writers and their works only were considered suitable for Muslim women. So therefore, there was always an attempt to prevent them from getting morally corrupt and also to prevent the Muslim community for being shamed due to all these initiatives that were being undertaken both by the administration as well as prominent Muslim personalities. However, still we see that there were so many women who made a mark for themselves, and they refused to be questioned, or they refused to even answer all those hostile questions that were being raised. So one can give example of Begums of Bhopal. And the prominent Muslim figures can be studied as pioneering examples of modern, educated, liberal and independent Muslim women who set examples for several others for acquiring education. The Begums, apart from being rulers, were also social reformers, and they established several educational institutions like schools, colleges and also Parda clubs to enable women to gain access to education despite the institution of Parda. In this context, I would also like to mention women like Muhammadi Begum. Muhammadi Begum can be described as the first woman editor of a magazine. She was the first woman in the Indian subcontinent, rather, to be the editor of a weekly magazine, Tahzeeb-e Niswan. And this Urdu magazine was largely dedicated for female emancipation. The magazine came out with its first edition on 1st July 1898. Muhammadi Begum started her campaign along with her husband Mumtaz Ali, who had also written a book stressing upon the rights of women named Hukuk-e Niswan. And he himself was a Deoband educated Lahore based publisher. He was a very close associate of Sir Syed Ahmad Khan also during the later years of Aligarh movement, and both of them had great zeal for spreading education. Muhammadi and her husband realized that it was very important that Muslim females also should have access to modern education along with men of their community. However, when the magazine for women was launched, it was not really, the whole idea was not really appreciated. And in fact, at that time, Aligarh College was only a boys' institution and there was no women's college in Aligarh. Even Sir Syed Ahmad Khan disagreed with Mumtaz and Muhammadi on the issue of female education. And it was only after death of Sir Syed Ahmad Khan that they actually launched this magazine for women. However, support of men was always very important for such crucial works. So Muhammadi Begum, who was born in 1878 in Shahpur, Punjab, married Mumtaz Ali in 1897, and Sayyid Muhammad Shah, who was the father of Muhammadi, himself was the principal of Wazirabad High School, and he ensured that his daughters received modern education. Muhammadi, during her early days, even used to play cricket and ride horses. She was not only very active but also an avid learner, and she learnt the art of publishing, editing, proofreading very early from her husband. She could read English, Hindi, Urdu, Persian as well as Arabic. And the first Urdu weekly was clearly dedicated to the cause of women education. In the beginning, Muhammadi and Mumtaz used to send free complimentary copies of the magazine to the well-known educated people. But in return, they only used to get letters of abuses. The magazine picked up very slowly, and even after 3 months, only 70 people subscribed to the magazine, and even after 5 years, there were only 428 subscriptions. Muhammadi later on launched another magazine for women, Mushir-e Madar, in 1905. And a very interesting experiment that was carried out by Mohammadi was on an all women shop. This shop was operated by the women and for the women. The title of Ashraf Ali Thanvi's Bahishti Zevar was also inspired by one of the poems that had been compiled by Mohammadi. As a social worker also, she remained quite busy, especially from 1897 onwards. She not only edited magazines, wrote essays, stories, poems, even held public meetings to emancipate women in India. And she died at a very young age of 30 in 1908. So, with so much to achieve and with so many years of hard work, one can clearly say that the cause of female education was definitely inspired and it got really encouraged by such Muslim women. Thank you.